Kia ora. Hey, it's Mona here from the Humans Connecting team. Our podcast is all about soothing, supporting, challenging, and inspiring you to become a connected human. The content of our podcast is of a general nature, and consuming this content is not the same as seeking individual advice from a connection mentor, registered mental health professional, or coach. Conversations about human connection address loneliness. We destigmatize loneliness here at Humans Connecting. We do that by talking about loneliness openly. Loneliness conversations necessarily include a range of topics which at times may be difficult for us to talk about, to hear, and to sit with. If throughout our conversation this is true for you, we encourage you to please contact a mental health hotline. The link in the episode description can help you find some immediate support for many places you may be in the world. Our advice to you is this: meet yourself where you are and how you are right now. If you don't feel up to it, we'll be right here ready to be by your side when you're ready. We're glad you're here. Let's jump in.
Hello, it's Phil. Welcome to the Humans Connecting podcast. We're so happy that you joined us for this episode because we're going to be joined really shortly by Professor Johanna Badcock, a global leader in the study of loneliness. Joe's here to talk with us about how studying loneliness helps us understand it. And because when we understand loneliness better, we then understand human connection better. Understanding loneliness helps us to respond to it in a really effective and coordinated way that reaches the minds, the hearts, and the souls of the humans experiencing loneliness, which is you and I and every human on the planet. But before we get too far into this episode and before Joe joins us, we need to do some housekeeping. And that starts by me introducing myself if you're new to the Humans Connecting podcast. So, hi, I'm Phil McAuliffe, and I'm the founder of Humans Connecting, and I'm a global loneliness thought leader. I'm the host of this podcast, and when I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm a speaker on loneliness and human connection. I'm a media commentator, I'm an author, a connection mentor, and a human who is endlessly curious about humans and the human condition. And, it's not a great part of the human condition, but loneliness is part of the human condition. And for me, I felt like I've been wrestling with the thoughts and feelings of loneliness for most of my life. But as I entered middle age a few years ago, the loneliness that I was experiencing and kind of had been experiencing for a while became impossible to ignore. I got some help, I got some support, and I started to get curious about the loneliness that I had experienced and that I was noticing around me. So I've been working on understanding loneliness and human connection since 2018 when I started The Lonely Diplomat. And then in January 2020, I started The Loneliness Guy. And I've combined everything that I've learned along the way, both at The Lonely Diplomat and The Loneliness Guy over those years. And together with the awesome team here, we created Humans Connecting in 2023. And our work here at Humans Connecting has two main goals. The first is to destigmatize loneliness. And the second is to help you, wherever you are in the world and however you identify as a human, to get the connection that you need and that you absolutely deserve. There's really a secret third option because I started this work because I couldn't see myself in the advice and the support about loneliness that was out in the world when I needed it most. And it felt like the support and advice that was on offer was for the bereaved and for the elderly, and I was neither. So Humans Connecting is the support and advice that I wish that I had access to when I first realized that my loneliness couldn't be ignored and I needed to do something different if I was to become a connected human. And we here at Humans Connecting want you to know that we are humans just like you. And we're here for you at humansconnecting.org when you're ready to take a step towards getting the connection that you need and that you absolutely deserve. And the final request before Joe joins us is just to let you know that we are a new podcast and Humans Connecting is a fledgling social impact enterprise. And we've got bold ambitions to help the world feel more connected because the humans in the world are feeling connected to themselves, to those most important to them, and to their communities. So if this episode or any of our content makes you think, supports you, or inspires you, please know that sharing this episode with just one other person is a great way to say thank you to us. And it really helps us have the impact that we are called to make. And if you're really feeling kind, another great way to support us is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or on whatever service you're listening to these words now, or engaging on YouTube if you're watching the video on YouTube. Both things take a moment, both support us, and are a great way to support this podcast without any cost, and they all make a huge difference. Whatever you choose to do, please know that we're really grateful for your support. To our guest today, Johanna Badcock is an adjunct professor at the School of Psychological Science at the University of Western Australia. She's a registered clinical psychologist and an independent research consultant. Jo completed her training in psychology at the universities of Oxford and Melbourne and has over 30 years' experience in research on mental health. She has a particular interest in the intersection between loneliness, mental health, and well-being. Over the past 8 years, she's worked as the Vice Chair, Deputy Chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee and Director of Evidence and Training for Ending Loneliness Together, Australia's peak body addressing loneliness and social isolation. In 2021, Jo co-founded the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, which is a global movement to connect people based on fostering global connections, knowledge sharing, and advocacy to reduce loneliness and social isolation. And Jo's recent focus, and we'll be discussing this in the episode, has been on workforce education, encouraging evidence-based practice and policy in healthcare. Current projects involve exploring the training needs of social workers, pharmacists, psychologists, audiologists, and aged care workers to better address loneliness in our community, something that she, as I said, explains further in our conversation. And Jo was elected a Fellow of the Association for Psychological Science in the US in 2018 and serves as an advisor and consultant to international agencies, including the World Health Organization, state and Commonwealth governments here in Australia, policymakers, community organizations, and clinicians to ensure that research evidence is accessible, understandable, and of benefit to those who need it most. I'm sure that you can understand why it's so great to welcome Jo to the Humans Connecting podcast. And I can't wait for you to join us right now for our chat. Professor Johanna Badcock, welcome to the Humans Connecting podcast. We're just chuffed for you to be here.
I feel it's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation to join you.
You are joining us from sunny Tasmania, which you said that you've moved a year ago from
Yes.
from Perth.
Yeah,
And one thing that I thought was really interesting, like listener, viewer, Joe and I have had a cracking conversation, as is often the way, before I pressed play. So if Joe has any of her word quota left for the day, that would be great.
I'll see what I can do.
But Joe, yeah, you were saying that you, in moving, across the country, and establishing yourself in a new community, new home, and stuff that, you were having to employ some of the techniques, and put some of the theories into practice in your own life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In like a sentence or less, what's the answer? How do we do this?
Oh, I can't say how we do it, but how I've been doing it, to be honest, is starting with baby steps. It's been 26 years in Perth and just on 12 months in Tasmania for me. And I can honestly say I've been really enjoying reconnecting, first of all, with family who are here that we haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of, having
Yeah.
mostly been in WA for a long time. So it's been really lovely to do that and get to be able to see a lot more of them. And actually, although it sounds kind of the opposite extreme, I've also found that in reconnecting with family, I've also thought, oh, I really ought to reconnect with a lot of other people. So I've been reconnecting with a lot of my friends from the UK,
Yeah.
a lot of college friends and other friends. And that's been a real blast. And it's so much easier, in a sense, to start with people that you do know.
Yes.
And it gives you time to think about, okay, now how am I going to find the new people in this community to connect with for the first
Yeah.
time? So
Yeah.
we're doing a little bit of that. We live in a lovely little place called Richmond, or actually just outside of Richmond, just northeast of Hobart. And we've been getting to know our neighbours, meeting them, finding out who they are, and going for lovely Christmas events and neighbour events and that sort of thing. And I've also decided it would be great to join a local group. So we've just joined a choir. Haven't sung in a choir for, well, I don't like to say how many years, but I guess kind of putting myself out there a little bit into vaguely scary territory, just to, what do they say, suck it and see if it works.
Yeah.
If it doesn't really matter, I'll try another group.
Yeah.
So yeah, trying the whole grab bag of, yeah, the toolkit for connecting and reconnecting.
I love it because it's so much easier to say it
Absolutely.
than it is to do it. And I want to like just say thanks for answering that. That was a bit of a curveball right at the beginning. I'm sorry. But it was I think at the end of it all, like when we sort of get it down to absolute fundamentals, like we all have to do this,
Yes.
whether whatever we do and however we are as a human. At the end of it, stripping all of that away, we still need to put ourselves
Yep.
out there.
It's the
Um,
same fundamental need that everyone has. We need to find our tribe, as they say, and therefore you have to get out there and find out where those points of connection might be.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, Joe, can you like I read your bio in the intro, and one thing that I kind of love about reading people's bios, and one of the many reasons why I love doing what I do here and talking to groups of people or talking to individuals or humans all. One of the things I love when we do bios, it's obviously, kind of, very LinkedIn. and what we do and like what's on our CV and resume and all that kind of stuff. And that tells some part of the story. But me being me, and not apologizing for being me, one of the things that I find deeply fascinating is hearing the story about why we do what we do, not starting the story of I've done this or I do this.
Yeah.
And because to me, the story of why is they're always deeply fascinating. So I'm curious, how did you get to be?
How did I get here from there?
How did you get to be like, from the beginning of it all? Like
Yeah. Look, what's the short answer to that? Well, look, I am a psychologist by training. I did experimental psychology early on, and then I studied clinical psychology, and I thought for a long while I would be a practicing clinical psychologist, but then I dipped my toe in the land of research psychology and thought, oh, this is good. And so I stayed with clinical psychological research for really all of my career. And for most of that time, my research focused on people with severe mental health problems, people with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and so on. And some of the early work that I did was very biological and neural in focus. And then some of my later work was very cognitive in focus, how we think about things, how we process information and attend to it. And some of it was also very behavioral. And I guess the bit that was really missing in that trajectory was the social. And then I got to collaborate with a wonderful group of people back in Perth, a team led by Professor Vera Morgan, who at the time was just completing the second national survey of psychosis in Australia. And Vera and I were having a chat, and I was talking about my growing interest in social issues. She'd done quite a lot on social issues in people with psychotic disorders. And we had included in the survey some questions around loneliness and social isolation. And so basically we began to dig a little into that data. Sadly, what we found was really appalling and upsetting in that the rates of loneliness, for example, were around twice that of the general population. So really high prevalence rates of loneliness in people with psychosis. But I think the thing that really kind of piqued my interest the most was from some of the qualitative information, chats with people with psychotic disorder. Because basically what they were saying, that it was not just that they felt lonely now, they expected to be lonely in the future. That was their future horizon for them, was that they thought that life was basically going to be one of loneliness and isolation. And I thought that was really appalling. And I just wanted to know a whole lot more about the social world of people with those sorts of issues and problems in their life. And more importantly, what were the consequences of those? And what were the potential inroads then to changing that state of affairs? And so following on from that, we just did a whole lot of work around that topic, including things like how the experience of loneliness led to increased rates of suicidal ideation and suicide behaviours. We looked at the interaction of loneliness with health service use. So it was associated with increased rates of hospital admissions and GP visits and so on. And then getting that story out to other stakeholders, if you like, other people who needed to know that unless you solve the issue of loneliness for this group, you are going to have consequences that you're not going to like. Because sadly, for some, what counts is the cost, the bottom line dollar. And so we could say, well, your health service costs are going to go up unless you attend to these issues. That's a side for me. tragic personal impact of loneliness on people's daily lives. So that was my first inroad into this world of social isolation and loneliness.
I think what really sticks out for me there, Joe, is the almost serendipitous, and I love that word, like the serendipity of it all, where something something appears to have like a penny dropped, or like, you know, I have in my mind, you know, like a piece of paper, you know, with the survey on it and the survey results on it. But like this little glint that's getting your attention over, you know, the loneliness and social isolation question.
And it's interesting you raise that too, because it's rather ironic that often researchers are criticised for basically undertaking research that they're interested in. I know that sounds bizarre, but they are.
No.
They often get a lot of criticism for basically doing exactly that, research that they're interested in, a question that interests them. And I would say, unless you have that core interest, you're unlikely to do anything useful as a consequence. So
Yes.
I put it out there. I challenge people to say, try doing research that you're not interested in and see how well that goes.
Wow, how hard it is to swing your legs out of bed in the morning when what awaits you feels like drudgery.
Yeah.
And doing things because you feel that you should be doing them.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, those cold mornings where, you know, you really don't want to get out of bed, but you're being pulled by purpose.
And of course, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on,
I was going to say that the consequence of having my serendipitous introduction to that space was that I then had a call from Michelle Lim, who of course is the person who's now the CEO of Ending Loneliness Together. She's also been doing research on psychosis and loneliness. And so I joined Ending Loneliness Together and started to move more and more and more of my research just into the loneliness space, and then expanding out to lots of other situations, contexts, groups of people, all of whom experiencing the problem, and then looking at what are the potential solutions around that. So that led to a whole host of connections and hopefully a little bit of positive impact in the work there. And then beyond that, the work that we eventually led in setting up the global initiative on loneliness and connection.
I hear that, and I don't know if you heard me say stop it when I heard you say you know, doing a little bit. I just want to say that interest, that spark of curiosity that you know, allowed to happen, and you know, back in the day, you know, you may have been wrestling with the, oh, should I, shouldn't I, you know, be doing this, but just thank you for following that curiosity, because, you know, that little bit, that slight pull on the thread at that time has led to the creation of GILC, the global
initiative.
Yeah,
global
sorry,
initiative
I'm just getting
on loneliness and connection. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I've just gotten a notification on my screen here that I was like, what? But anyway, yes, yeah. So with the global initiative on loneliness and connection, like it sounds trite. It sounds trite, but following your interest can actually have profound global impacts. If you keep on following that curiosity, because the curiosity is there for a reason, even if it is at the time a little uncomfortable, and you know, it raises those kind of tensions within us about like, well, should I, shouldn't I? But yeah, just thank you for following through and that curiosity.
It's been a hugely fascinating journey along the way. absolutely fascinating to look at, the consequences, the causes, the groups
Yeah.
involved, what the current policy perspective is. Um, sharing knowledge on this topic with people, all over the world. It's just
Mm.
been an absolute honour and a pleasure.
I have, I have to say that where the I wonder if you could say the same thing if you were following the thing that you should have been doing, or were told by a supervisor or a mentor,
Mhm.
don't do this, do that.
Yeah.
Whether you could at this time of your career look back and go, it's just been so rewarding, following the path of where the funding money, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. Generally
Yeah.
it's money.
Yeah.
Has
Sadly, yes.
been. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think a lesson, like an insight that I think is really interesting to share here for the viewer and the listener is, I think it's pretty clear, but I'll spell it out. The power that comes from um, allowing us to be curious about why something is.
Mm.
Um, and knowing that there's bound to be tensions between what we should or shouldn't be doing, or how things should be, or whatever it is, but there are going to be tensions there. But
I think
how?
I think there's
Yep.
also great power in recognizing that if you're on a new path, which, for a long time, that was a new research path for me,
Mm,
and just being comfortable with the idea that you didn't know everything. I mean, no one ever knows everything, but you know what I mean? Researchers are typically aiming to be experts in their
yes.
field. And when you're new in the territory, it's really important to recognize that actually there are lots of other people out there with expertise, and it's really great to get their perspective and their input, and then combine, that, because that diversity of perspective is really where the power lies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. And yes, I don't know if I can agree any harder, because that is, and knowing something like the content um, of loneliness and social isolation, while there are many commonalities in how it presents, how it makes us feel, um, and as I understand it, like the consequences of leaving loneliness to my word here, but to fester,
Mhm.
um, is that's really like that the consequences of that are really profound. Um, and but knowing that there are so many of those commonalities to it, but each the way that we get to loneliness, when we experience loneliness, as we all do from time to time, and we're meant to, of course, from time to time,
Yeah,
that's as unique as we are.
absolutely. So it's really
So
great when you're talking to, someone who might be from Denmark or New Zealand or Japan, just to name a few examples, and talk about what are the local approaches they're taking
yeah,
around this challenge. Because sometimes their approaches are really very different to suit their culture, their environment, their local context, and they won't work if you try and translate them back to our Aussie world.
right,
But
yeah,
other times you think, oh, that's brilliant. That's so easy. We can we can borrow that and have a go at that in our local place as well. So yeah, it's that whole idea around, the causes, how we get on this path to loneliness and how we get out of it at the other end is highly individual. There are some similarities and there are some differences,
yes.
and we can learn so many different perspectives just by sharing our stories across the world.
I find this tremendously inspiring, because it is yeah, like it is only I'm really firmly of the opinion And I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire Humans Connecting team, but I would be very surprised if anybody had a dissenting view here. But it is when we apply our unique perspectives, our unique insight, and listen to that of others, that somewhere in all of that are the nuggets that can be helpfully provided to humans experiencing loneliness and want to do connection. Because somewhere in the middle of all of that is a truth for someone to pick up and use. I think it's so awesome. In moving to another question, Joe, like how, I think you've kind of answered a question here about why study loneliness. But what I've picked up in your answer to how you got to be who you are and how you are now, and sort of following that curiosity and changing the world, the why studying loneliness, I think the answer was in there, in terms of, this is a problem or an experience, not a problem, but an experience that we all have, but just hasn't been studied in its own unique way, or not unique way, but in and of itself. It was sort of a secondary issue in trying to address other problems that sort of was coming up as a secondary issue, but really was a primary issue. And is there anything else in that you'd want to say in terms of why we study?
Answer to why do we study it? I mean, you've covered in your other podcast really beautifully, that we know what comes along with the loneliness package. It's really bad for our health, it's bad for our mental health, it's bad for our social well-being, our academic achievement, you name it, it's bad for it. And we know that it's really prevalent in society and all of that. But I think there are a few different levels of the answer to the why study loneliness question that still need addressing. Why study it? Because there are loads of misconceptions about loneliness. So we need to be challenging some of those misconceptions. It's often thought in the past to just be a problem of older adults. We now know from studying it that, in fact, it's common across society and across age groups, and probably, if anything, peaks in the 18 to 24-year-old age group. We also know from research that I've done and many others as well that it's common in people with psychotic disorders. It's common in people with autism and so on. So there's that whole level of why do we study this particular issue. And I think there's also some answers around why do we study it. It's because our intuitions are actually often wrong. So our intuitions around what causes it are often really based on our own personal experience. Well, I got lonely because, I moved from WA to Tas. So, migrating must be the real key cause of loneliness. But of course, for lots of other people, it's not that at all. There have been lots of previous ideas around causes of loneliness, that it's, people who are introverts, for example. Well, they're lonely because they're introverted. Well, of course, research has since shown that view is also wrong, that introverts can get just as lonely as anybody else. It plays out in their life a little differently than for extroverts, but yes, they get subject to loneliness as well. And our intuitions on what the solutions are can also be wrong, basically. And the most obvious point there is that simply telling someone to, get up off their backsides and go and connect, i.e. to connect socially, perhaps fix their objective social isolation, but very frequently leaves their loneliness absolutely where it was. And so research is really good at beginning to unpick in much more detail the causes the consequences and the potential solutions. So I think that is the broader picture of why study this topic. Yeah.
I think what's really interesting here is it kind of like lends into my next question is like knowing why we study it. And I love the answer there of essentially debunking myths.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, pardon me, how loneliness is studied.
Yeah.
And which seems like an easy question to ask, but I feel that there's a lot to that answer. But yeah, how do we study? How does one study? Yes.
Well, look, again, at the broadest level, there are, I guess, two main approaches. One is a quantitative approach and one's a qualitative approach. So let's do the last one first. So the qualitative approach involves discussion groups, interviews, getting face to face and really talking to people who've had the experience and getting their story of how they got there and what they've done about it and what solutions they've found useful and so on. And that's full of really rich, descriptive experience about what's often called the phenomenology, the experience of loneliness. And I think, to be honest, there's a bit of a resurrection of the qualitative approach to research on loneliness that is happening and is sorely needed. And why is it needed is because when you go back to the quantitative approach is basically mostly using some sort of formalized questionnaire or a survey. So you have specific questions and you're asking people about how much or how often they have experienced loneliness, and you're putting a rating to that. The problem is that many of our questionnaires on this topic of loneliness were developed in the 1980s or some a little earlier than that, and developed on a very specific group of people, often white college undergraduates in the United States. And whilst there were many benefits of that and the tools that were generated, the questionnaires that were generated, like the University of California, Los Angeles Loneliness Scale, one of the most widely used measurement tools for assessing loneliness. And they have great many strengths, but they were developed with those groups initially in mind, and they probably don't adequately capture the full experience of loneliness that you get from talking to people about loneliness.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, there's a lot of really exciting work going on all across the globe, developing new and better, hopefully, questionnaires that can be used to get a better quantitative approach to measuring loneliness. The problem with that is, of course, developing a measurement tool, actually, it's a very in-depth process. It takes a lot of time to validate, make sure it's what we call psychometrically robust. It does what it says on the tin, and it actually measures the way you want, what you think it's measuring, and doing it reliably and consistently. And so that might take anything from 10 years onwards to develop new tools that have been properly validated. And so we're left in this uneasy situation at the moment of we've got a lot of tools that are widely used. We're going to have to carry on using those a little bit longer, but perhaps give a little bit more acknowledgement to their weaknesses as well as their strengths until such point that we get some better tools available. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that, and I am famous for mispronouncing these two words, so I almost need to clap them out to make sure I get the emphasis on the right syllable. But when it comes to quantitative. That's the word that I can't say.
Quantitative.
Quantitative. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I've learned how to say quantitative properly today. But there's not many words that trip me up, but that one does every time. But yes, so quantitative has ask someone like how often you experience loneliness.
Yeah.
Qualitative asks in a broad way why.
That's probably true at the moment, but it doesn't mean that future quantitative tools couldn't get to some of the why questions as well. Yeah. But quantitative tools at the moment mostly assess questions that are phrased in terms of how often. Broadly speaking, that's going to look at frequency.
Yeah.
There are a whole lot of other issues around, well, how long does an episode of loneliness last, for example? So duration. How strongly do you feel lonely when you're feeling loneliness?
Yeah.
Which is a question of intensity or strength. So that all of those aspects of loneliness are also typically at the moment not asked. And they're, I think, likely to be really important because we know that there are some people who have what's called transient loneliness. They feel it rather fleetingly, and it comes and then it goes.
Yeah.
And then there are other people who experience loneliness on a more chronic way. And by chronic here, I'm talking about that in a very specific way. It means that it's enduring. Yes. It's a lasting sense of loneliness over many months and years often. What we know a whole heck of a lot less about is how people transition from those transient or more fleeting phases of loneliness into chronic or enduring loneliness and how you help people out of it. And it's possible that some of the processes, what we call the mechanisms underlying transient loneliness, actually reach a tipping point and change when it becomes enduring. And that is important because it may mean that how we intervene and what strategies we use to help people experiencing a transient loneliness may be different from that of those who've had loneliness for years and years and years. Is that too long an answer?
No, oh God, no, God, no. I don't know. I was just about to say I don't know about the viewer and the and the listener here. I'm finding this like absolutely fascinating, and this is because it's so important. It's so important in responding to an issue on the size and scale of loneliness globally right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to use the words the loneliness epidemic because I think that there's a risk of using those words so much that they, it's like there's an epidemic of, I don't know, I don't know, like any kind of random thing. And it kind of loses its power here. But one thing that I'm finding this really just so helpful, Joe, is that this goes to like the very core of the experience for individuals. And as we've said before, like there are 8 billion ways that we feel lonely. And exponentially, I'm not even sure I'm using that word right there, but like a limitless number, an infinite number within us of how we get to experience loneliness, lots of paths within each of us. So, 8 billion times infinity, that's a lot of ways to getting towards this experience, to the thoughts and feelings. What I'm loving about this is that, and completely nerding out, is that this is to, finding those commonalities, as you say, for those interventions. What I'm curious about at this point, though, we'll find out what I'm curious about right after this short break.
It doesn't matter what business you're in. At the heart of every workplace, there's a simple yet powerful need for people to feel connected, to feel seen and heard, to feel appreciated and valued. This is Pete from the Humans Connecting team, And I wanted to share with you a little bit about a program that we provide called the Creating Connected Workplaces. Now look, there's plenty of generic one-size-fits-all courses and videos out there on the market. And perhaps you've got your work fitness program or the Friday team lunches or after work drinks, and all of these things are fine for connection. But look, as a business, as a team, as a human, you deserve more than just fine. We're here to go way beyond that and help create workplaces where every person feels a deep sense of belonging, where every voice matters, and where the strength of our human connections help fuel the collective success. Just like every human is unique and different, every business is different as well. So this program is tailored and curated specifically for the needs of your organisation. But look, don't just take our word for it. Have a look at our website over here at humansconnecting.org and see how we've helped businesses from Specsavers to Medibank. Now, if this sounds like the type of workplace that you'd like to have, reach out to Phil and the team here at Humans Connecting, and let's help create a connected community where everyone can thrive in your workplace, because you're worthy of that.
Hey, welcome back. Let's find out what I was really curious about is how is it that the subjectiveness of the lonely experience, the experience of loneliness, how that is taken into account, how that's like measured, and I could be getting right into some detail here that might be difficult to summarize, but I'm really keen to see how is that kind of subjectiveness in either analyses, how is that sort of catered for?
I'm not sure I could write that on the back of a postage stamp. I don't quite know how to answer that question, Phil. That's a doozy. That's a big one. One thought that comes to mind that may just touch on it a little is when you think about the subjective experience of loneliness, and say you're someone who's just having a fleeting, transient episode of loneliness, you think about the approaches that people often try and use as solutions to loneliness. You might often say to someone, well, you've had these episodes in the past. How have you got out of it before? Which is that subjective pulling on your strengths to say, well, you've been through it before. What did you do last time to help? That, again, is their own subjective and personal journey, because what might help for that person might not help for another person. So let's at least use their strengths to say, how have you got out of this before? And sometimes in sharing those subjective skills on how I got out of my loneliness might be really helpful. But let's also switch that. So that tells you a little bit about how interventions, solutions for loneliness need to be subjective. But let's also translate that to someone who's had loneliness for a very, very long time. If you were to ask them, well, how did you get out of this last time? And they've been suffering loneliness for 4 or 5 years. It's a bit of a rude question, right? It's a totally insensitive question, because they probably can't even remember how they got out of it last time, because it's years ago, because they're having it daily and intensely, and it makes no subjective sense to them to ask them, how did you get out of it last time? So understanding the journey in and the journey out, you need two different, entirely different approaches for those kind of scenarios. That's just one indicator of just how personal approach you need to take to the topic.
Yeah.
That's,
at once, that's both, well, first of all, I'm disappointed that you didn't have the answer to that, because I have my pen poised.
I'll try harder next time.
But second of all, I think, there's also sort of I was going to say, about to sound very public servanty, but there's an opportunity for hope there. I think there's hope in this, in that, you know, I think there's a balance between, you know, someone essentially bootstrapping it, you know, and well, I got out of this the last time I experienced it and stuff, but that, as you say, that someone who cannot remember never having been in this, never having these
They're
thoughts and
stuck
feelings.
in that
Yeah,
mode for a very long
yeah,
time. Yeah,
yeah. But I think even though like that's a horrible rut, speaking from experience, that's a
hmm
horrible rut to be in.
yeah,
And sometimes one of the toughest things, speaking again from my own experience, is that, you know, we can know that this is a rut,
absolutely.
and we can know the theory, and we can, you know, essentially read the books, listen to the podcasts, you know, become like essentially like a loneliness groupie, potentially, like for want of a better term. But the hard thing is getting beyond those thoughts and feelings that this is the rut that you deserve. Or like, you know,
Absolutely.
this is the rut, but it's my rut. And the
Yeah,
other getting out of this rut is just a bit scary.
yeah, yeah. I think the key point I'm trying to make is that the subjective experience is different from one person to the next. So
Yeah.
the solution needs to be your solution.
Yeah.
And if that happens to be that you can't pull on your own resource at the moment, you do have hope because you know other people have actually been lonely for a very long time and they've still got out of it. So it
Yeah.
is about experiencing it as, yes, it's normal. And sometimes it goes on for far longer than any of us had hoped for,
Yeah.
but there's still a solution. We just
Yeah.
have to find the right solution that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's that, and that's the source of hope.
yeah,
That's the source of hope,
absolutely.
is
Yeah,
that you know, there are smart people around the world, and there are, you know, people who want others, want you to thrive.
yes,
Um, but also um, to use this experience in a way that actually, you know, like it's part of your story. It's not going away just because, you know, it's uncomfortable or whatever. But the key to it, and I said this before, like the key to like to moving beyond the thoughts and feelings of loneliness is within the loneliness itself,
yeah,
which is not a fun, easy solution. You know, yeah, this is just amazing, Joe. I'm really like I'm glad that you answered that question of how do we, you know, balance out the subjectiveness of it, um, in the ways like, well, we don't know how really, but we're working on it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that that's the cause. That's another cause for hope as well. Is that, yeah,
I think I'd also probably add, with a sort of definite researcher hat on, is for other researchers coming behind, remember to balance your quantitative approaches by asking your participants in your projects more about their experience so that you actually combine the qualitative and the quantitative. And I think with that, you'll get a much richer understanding of the processes, not just the description of the facts, but the processes. Because I really am a firm believer that without understanding those processes, we'll not get very much further along the trajectory of helping people who are lonely to get through it and get beyond it.
that's. I just wanted to give that the clear air there, because that's profoundly like profoundly awesome. It's fantastic. It's fantastic advice there, that, you know, maintaining that balance. Joe, want to ask a question around like in throughout your career, and, you know, the work that you've started, the work that you've led. What's been the biggest surprise for you?
You gave me the heads up you were going to ask this question.
I did. I did, which is
And,
unfair of me, isn't it? This
and
seems like the kind of question that I should just lob on you.
well, I'm glad you gave me time to think about it. And yeah, it's actually really difficult to say what has surprised me. And what's also surprising to me is one of my own bits of research was actually one of the most surprising outcomes. And here's the why. So a little while ago, I teamed up with some collaborators in Denmark, and in fact, my own daughter, who's a psychologist, also interested in loneliness research. And she's a practicing psychologist, as was one of the team members in Denmark. And what we were really interested in looking at was some of the best available evidence for individual level interventions for loneliness. And they are, as it turns out, what we call psychological interventions for loneliness. These are often based on therapy. It's called cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches. Some of the listeners and viewers may be familiar with that broad suite of approaches. But the best evidence we have for individual level solutions for loneliness are these cognitive behavioral approaches, and they involve us thinking about what are the unhelpful thoughts that we often have when we're lonely, and challenging those thoughts, because often those thoughts are very maladaptive. We often feel that people are thinking bad things about us, and they're not really. They might just be, their attention might be somewhere else. Or, so we have a lot of these unhelpful thinking styles, and where we direct our attention is often not great. And the cognitive behavioral approaches can help us identify what those thinking patterns are and change them, basically, to much more helpful approaches. So given that that's the best available evidence for an individual level solution for loneliness that we know about at the moment, it's really ripe for translation into clinical practice. In other words, let's move the research evidence into the practitioner space so that they can use it in their daily practice. So we thought, oh, that's a good idea. Let's have a look at the quality of reporting of the psychological interventions for loneliness. So that's what we did. And we took 2 systematic reviews of psychological interventions for loneliness, and there were maybe 60 or so individual studies within those systematic reviews. And we interrogated the quality of reporting of those, because a clinician, health professional, who wants to use these approaches in their daily practice needs to know detail. They don't need to know this was, a CBT approach to loneliness. They need to know things like what procedures were used, what materials were used, who provided it, when, what format was it in, a whole host of detail of information. Fortunately, there's a really good checklist around for identifying all of those elements of an intervention. So we used a structured tool to look at the quality of reporting of these interventions. And the short story is it's woeful. So that's the surprise, right? Of the 13 studies that actually were kept in our analysis, fewer than half reported all the details that a clinician, a mental health practitioner, or other health practitioner would need to know to be able to implement that intervention in practice. About a third didn't provide any information about what would be materials used by the professional. About a third didn't provide any information about the procedures, the precise procedures that were used, what format it was used for the intervention. There was very little information about how the intervention was tailored for the individual client. It's absolutely essential. Otherwise, you risk a sort of one-size-fits-all approach and not taking account exactly what we've been discussing, the subjective, individualized experience of loneliness for an individual. And overall, not one of the studies that we looked at got the tick of approval in providing all of the key elements in their reporting of that intervention. Not one. And you just think all that effort that's gone into conducting that research, in a sense, is wasted, because it is not going to be able to be implemented in real life, because they're not providing enough information for the clinician to know everything they need to know. You just think, and that's despite moves to have quality of reporting as something that journal editors look at. There's a whole sort of review process in that space that's supposed to improve the quality of reporting. And also poor quality of reporting of that sort makes it also very difficult for other researchers to build on that research, because they also need the details to know, is my research really similar to theirs, or is it a bit different to what was done before? And so that whole sort of snowballing effect of research growing and critiquing itself gets hampered, because we don't know whether our research was actually like the previous research, or is actually quite different in some fundamental way. So there's just one example of it. It just blew my mind as to, that was a big surprise. I thought we'd be doing better. And I think there are a lot of reasons why that's happening, and that's often to do with, when you publish these days, the amount of words that can go into an article is often highly constrained by the journal. Yes. You have to keep within the word count. So we're sacrificing the detail that we really need along the way. But if that's the case, we need to be a bit more inventive and creative in finding ways to overcome that, even if it's just a little postscript note saying details of this procedure could be provided on request from contacting the author, or providing the material in more detail in what's called supplementary material in a journal article. But we need to put far more attention to the users of the research, so that the quality of reporting of interventions in this case can actually be used. So there's one example.
I think it's a well, sadly great example. That and I feel that we can all kind of relate to it, because when you're sort of spent the time, spent the effort to research, to analyze, and to come up with something that some measures that can work. That the implementation of it, kind of falls short, or very short, and how sometimes the system, which sounds very, very, very general, but the communication system itself is also constraining that flow of necessary information to the people who need to get it.
So, of course, the sequelae of that is that many of our health professionals are really underprepared to work in this space. And I guess more broadly, one of the surprising things I guess I still find about the research that's been done on loneliness and social isolation is how little of it seems to be being filtered into the curriculum of all the relevant health practitioners. And so a lot of the work that I've focused on of late has actually been on workforce development, so involving projects with audiologists, great collaboration with Beck Bennett in Queensland, who's looking at audiologists' needs for training, because often hearing impairment is associated with problems of social isolation. So the workforce needs to know, how do I assess and how do I help in that space with what's appropriate in their context? With Jenny Kirshner, who's working with pharmacists, again, we need workforce development, because we know loads of pharmacists know who the you like, frequent flyers to their pharmacy are, who are often there because they're lonely. But we need to therefore build up workforce knowledge and awareness of what they can do to help. And similarly, another project with Ending Loneliness Together and Bolton Clark Research Institute looking at aged care providers and workforce development there. And that's just 3 examples. But we need to help translate this often huge body of research on loneliness and social isolation and get that research into the educational curricula of all the relevant disciplines. Because certainly in my experience, if you get introduced to it during your training, you will take that through into your working life pretty much forever. And if you don't get introduced to it, then you never will, or rarely so, and or not in a systematic way. So I think we need to do a lot more connection between research and workforce development so that we can do a better job of this in our community. So that it's a term I like that I came across elsewhere. It's no wrong door.
Yes.
It doesn't matter where you enter with a question or seeking help. It could be your pharmacy, it could be your social worker, it could be your GP, but all should then be well equipped to understand the issue and know some really useful ways to help get that person toward the help that they would need and that would fit their needs and match their priorities.
I think what's coming up for me here, Jo, is maximising the impact of the work being done. And finding the most strategic places really to insert the findings of the work being done, the research being done in very effective ways that, as you say, someone can carry through for the rest of their career. And finding that, I'm sure time and space in curricula are very, highly sought after, during training periods, and then, getting professionals to of any persuasion, medical or otherwise, to have the time and space to continue to do the training that they need to do while they're also still trying to do doing.
But I'll come back with, it is therefore interesting to reflect on why space is not being provided in educational curricula around this topic. It's often downplayed, ignored, or trivialized.
Yeah.
And, you've got to query some of the stigmatizing or beliefs or misconceptions around this as being an unimportant issue. And once you translate some of the research evidence around that and make that evidence, have a greater awareness for these varied professional groups and to understand the significance of the issues for people and their health and their social well-being, then I think there's very strong grounds for saying you simply have to make space for this in the curriculum because it impacts everything, absolutely everything. And in fact, it goes beyond the groups I've mentioned. So, for example, and in fact, maybe in some ways they're making more inroads in the education sector with training of teachers and others in the school environment on the importance of social connection for social well-being and connectivity in school and the connection that has with academic outcomes. So, and workplaces. I know that's also a topic close to your heart. So
yeah.
So I think there are some interesting issues that we need to reflect on as to why we wouldn't prioritise a space for this in our educational curricula across the board. I can't really think at this moment of anywhere where it wouldn't have some value.
For me, and for us here at Humans Connecting, we talk about loneliness literacy and how hard it is to talk about. I mean, it's because of the work that you've been doing and the work that a whole lot of people are doing globally. We're becoming more and more aware of how damaging loneliness is for us when left untended. That's, fantastic, but and it's an absolutely great start, but coming down to the individual who's experiencing those thoughts and feelings, how to talk about it, how to talk about their own, in a similar way to, how does the research translate into practical, and how does all of this work translate into the human who can then go, actually, like, this is how I talk about my loneliness, in a way that, like in a way that we can become more loneliness literate, in speaking of loneliness and receiving stories of loneliness without responding with pity, and without responding to, well, this is just what you have to do. You have to like do this, do that, do that, and Google says you have to do this. So off you go, go and fix it.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. So, Joe, just being mindful of the time here, one thing that I want to ask is in knowing all of this, and we're so grateful again for both your time here and sharing your considerable expertise here. I think it would be remiss of me to not ask this question. So to someone, to the listener, to the viewer now, who kind of press play because they're kind of interested, kind of sort of maybe, but then they've realized that, what they might be thinking and what they might be feeling within them is part of a loneliness experience. What advice could you, or what advice can you give now, like just one piece of advice that supports someone who, in your view, could help them feel more connected, or to take steps to become more connected?
Oh, wow. Okay. What advice would I give? I guess the primary bit of advice is being aware that you are likely feeling lonely, that is the beast, that's the thing that you're feeling, is actually a great step. It's really the first step of the journey out. Is just sitting there and realizing, oh, I think I'm lonely. What can I do about that? As we were talking before we commenced the podcast, loneliness is really just a signal. It's just information. And, we use our emotions all the time as a point of information, and loneliness is just another one of those normal signals that, hey, I need to do something about this. I'm not sure what necessarily at the moment, but just recognizing, sitting with it, being aware that that is likely what it is actually a really great first step. Because without that first step, you don't make change. So that would be what I would say, is recognize and say, well, in a sense, well done for recognizing you're part of the human race. And boy, this is very unpleasant, but it's loneliness and I can do something about it.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant advice, because what we say here at Humans Connecting is that brings awareness, and with awareness comes choice.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's where the hope lies. The hope lies where we exercise choice. We can choose to do nothing with this. We can choose to deny it, or we can choose to do something about it. And each one of those has pros and cons. but like we can't do anything unless we're aware of it.
I would
I think
add to
yeah.
that choice and the decisions around choice are often couched also potentially in terms of blame and discussions around blame. And that's definitely not what I'm talking about. This is not a point of saying I'm lonely and therefore I'm blaming myself because it's my responsibility to fix it. Because much as I've discussed a lot of individual factors on loneliness, we know there are loads and loads and loads of community and societal reasons also why people get lonely.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not connecting the two. I'm not saying therefore I am to blame. It is simply a question of saying, I now recognize that this feeling that I'm having is loneliness. And now I can explore if I want to do anything about it, and if so, what that will be. One of those things could be reaching out and talking to someone else about it.
Yeah. I think that's thank you for that follow-up. It's fundamental to say that, essentially, just because we're experiencing loneliness doesn't mean that we're broken, doesn't mean that we're at fault, doesn't mean that anybody is at fault. But yeah, recognizing that the experience is being had is in itself like that very powerful first step. Jo, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the podcast, and not just this, but for all the work that you have done, and as you start to take steps into retirement.
Yes.
I think it is really the advice that you gave to people following in your footsteps, wherever they are in the world, like in researching loneliness and wanting to identify the some responses that have that impact that is needed. I feel that that's really that was really powerful. Your response to that suggestion. You are in many ways an absolute trailblazer, and before I press record on this, we've said that we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Mm-hmm. We sure do.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're none of us here just because we're all absolutely brilliant in and of ourselves. There are a lot of other people who came before us.
But if we're talking about advancing our understanding and doing what we can while we can to advance understanding, you've like moved. I'm trying to pick the right metaphor here, but you've walked us down the road a hell of a long way during your career.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sure there'll be loads of exciting developments in the future as well.
Yeah. Jo Badcock, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode, and we'd love to hear what you thought about it. So please comment on YouTube or on our social channels. Be sure to check out our website, humansconnecting.org, for details of how we can support you get the connection that you need and, remember, you absolutely deserve. There are also details about how we can help you and the people in your workplace create your connected workplace where the humans who work there can truly thrive. Also, if you're a business and are looking for ways to support humans to feel more connected, please check the link in the episode description to partner with us. That could be through advertising on future episodes of the podcast or collaborating with us in other ways. Again, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We simply cannot wait to see you in the next one. But until then, it's time for you to become an awesomely connected human.